Hello and welcome to Fearless Authenticity with me, Jeanne Sparrow, where we find our biggest sources of success in who we really are. These are conversations and meditations on what it looks and feels like when we use our unique gifts to find our passions, make our dreams come true, and engage with the world in the way that we were created to serve it. I hope this gets deep because that's where we find the best stuff. But don't get it twisted. It's also about the fun of life, because if it ain't fun, it ain't worth doing. I always say, be brave, be free, be you. So let's do that together. With my guest today, she is a woman who is making history. She became the first African-American woman to become lieutenant governor in Illinois in 2019, among a field of only 4 women who've served in that position. Since she has taken office, she has been an advocate for justice and equity and a wide variety of the state's needs, including Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, Illinois Council on Women and Girls, as well as rural affairs, military and economic development, as well as caregivers, which is something she and I have in common. She is an attorney with her own consulting firm focused on alternative dispute resolution. She's a Southside girl, graduate of Kenwood Academy, Kenwood, U of I, and DePaul. She is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, as well as a proud wife, mother of 4 daughters, plus a marathon runner, triathlete, dance enthusiast, and Chicago Sky fan. It is my distinct honor and my very big pleasure to welcome to the Fearless Authenticity podcast, the one and only Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Juliana Stratton. I got to put on my glasses to see all this gloriousness. Hello and welcome, love.
Hello, Jeanne. I am so thrilled to be joining you. Thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite topics, fearless authenticity.
Because it defines who you are. Now, before we dive into you, I know that you love to talk about the way you serve our state. And actually, that is on the topic of fearless authenticity, especially these 2 topics, these things that you're working on right now. Food insecurity and equity in agriculture, and then teachers. Which one do we want to start with?
Well, I think we start with the food insecurity and agricultural equity, I think, first and foremost, because we launched that campaign recently, and I'm really proud of it. You know, when I was sworn into office alongside Governor Pritzker, now just over 3 years ago, believe it or not, I talked about during my speech, my inauguration speech, about how my family, specifically my great-great-grandfather who had been enslaved, and then when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Lincoln, and I was drawing the parallel to, the state of Illinois, President Lincoln, but also my own family that had been impacted by that Emancipation Proclamation. When they were freed, they were given a plot of land in Mississippi, and they tilled that land, and they started a school, and they started a church, and they fed the community with the food that they grew and they farmed. And, they started a store. They basically used that land to build everything that community needed to help that community be healthy and to make sure that the families in that area had what they needed. And it's now called Stevensville, Mississippi. And shortly before being sworn in, I went to Stevensville for the first time in my life, because what I knew was that much of Illinois was an agricultural state, that agriculture is the #1 industry. And there are many people who look at Chicago because it is such a big city, of course, one of the greatest cities in the world. But there's so much more that is the state of Illinois. And I wanted to tap into the rural roots that I had, the agricultural roots that I had. And in doing so, what I learned so much about was that, there are so many of us in Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian communities that had ancestors tied to the land, who worked the land, but because of policies that were really rooted in systemic racism, We've been disconnected from the land. And so that agricultural equity and food insecurity initiative is really about reconnecting us to the land, thinking about the opportunities that can be available to our communities, which not only is about agriculture, which some people think only means farming. There's lots of ways to get involved in agriculture, but agriculture is our connection to food. So the initiative is called Ag Connects Us All, and it's really about coming back to what we all know. We all deserve access to fresh, nutrient-dense food, and that's something that we need in our communities. And certainly we're going to help do everything that we can to make that more available to the people of Illinois.
I love this line of conversation because I too come from a family of farmers, but it's much closer in my world because I'm originally from Louisiana. We still actually own a farm in Northeast Louisiana, probably not too far from your people in Mississippi because we're right near the border. And I remember having conversations with friends about something about food. And one of my friends was like, well, I don't know where my food comes from. And I was like, wow, I know exactly where my food comes from because I've seen it grown.
That's right.
And
yeah, need for young people to understand. There are young people who go into a grocery store today or a gas station, unfortunately, if they're living in a place that's where there's high rates of food insecurity, which has increased during this pandemic in every single one of our 102 counties. So there are young people who don't know when they see that carton of milk or that what do we call the eggs? They come in a crate, the carton eggs.
It's a thing of eggs.
The thing they come in. They don't know where those eggs and that milk comes from. They think it comes from the grocery store or it comes from the delivery truck. No, we have to understand where it comes from, and we have to recognize, I'm so glad to hear that you are still connected to your family's farms. Right now in Illinois, there are probably about over 72,000 farms that are owned by white Illinoisans. But when we get to Hispanic Illinoisans or Latinos, we have about 821 farms owned by Hispanic Illinoisans. And then when we get to Black Illinoisans, it's closer to under 200, about 188 or so.
Wow.
That the case for people who historically have farmed the land. And we know that land is an access to wealth. It's an access to prosperity. So when policies were created where there was discrimination, whether through the United States Department of Agriculture or policies or even violence that pushed people off of the land, or some of the sharecropping where people never were able to fully own the land. I mean, we could go on and on about the kinds of things that have happened throughout history that has disconnected us to the land. So you're having connection to the land, you're able to see this is where our food comes from. This is how we can make sure that we have access to healthy, nutritionally dense produce. This is how we can let the next generation know you have access, you have land, and you have access to food. And that's something that I believe that everyone should at least be aware of, the opportunities that exist. And that's what we're working on through the Ag Connects Us All initiative.
And I took it for granted. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And there's so many things that we definitely take for granted. And one of the things, though, that I love about you is that you see, and I've had the opportunity to talk to you about so many things that we have in common, like taking care of our parents who had dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that. But you bring such passion to every issue. And you also see those connecting threads of because a lot of times we think about justice and equity in very separate ways from our everyday life. We see it as something that happens when we're in trouble or we want to make something right. I want to switch to you just a little bit, and we'll talk about the teacher initiative in just a moment, but I want to talk to you about how you got here. Did you always know? Did you always have that fighting spirit in you? Did you became an attorney, you've done a number of different things, consulting, and now to lieutenant governor. What has been the thing that has sustained you? And did you always see that for yourself?
Well, I certainly did not imagine that I would be the lieutenant governor of the state of Illinois, the first Black lieutenant governor and the first Black woman to serve as a constitutional officer in our state. None of that was sort of in my vision about what my life. And in fact, I've never really kind of approached my career or the direction of my life by setting forth, this is where I'm going to go, and these are the steps that I need to take. What I've always thought was more important for me was to think about, what are the gifts that I've been created with? What are the things that are in me? And how can I use that wherever I am? So I started at a law firm right out of law school. And the work that I was doing around juvenile justice and elder law and things that I was passionate about, that was important for me. Then I went to start a mediation firm, and I had that mediation firm for 2 decades, where I worked on employment discrimination cases, something that was incredibly important to me, and I was passionate about that. I went on to work in a number of different governmental agencies, including at Cook County in the city of Chicago. And the first office that I ran for, quite frankly, was local school council of Kenwood Academy, which is the high school that I attended. And I had daughters attending there, and I just was passionate about access to public education. So I didn't look at it from a standpoint of what is the title that I could have or the office that I could hold. I looked at it as, what strengths do I have? What do I believe that I've been put on this earth to do? And what I found is that when you are focused on using your gifts, there will be room made for you in whichever space you find yourself in to utilize those gifts. And I think one of the things that I think is really important for all of us to do is to do an assessment of that. What am I good at? And not just what am I good at because there's a skill that I picked up, but what intrinsically is in me that says, you know what, if I had to do this every single day, it would feel amazing. And so I know that I'm an advocate. I know that I'm a problem solver. I know that I like to bring people together. And in all of those roles that I just mentioned, I do that, including the one that I have right now. And that's why when people say, it seems like you have fun when you do your work, I do, because I'm doing what I actually love to do.
Girl, you could teach my Fearless Authenticity course alone. Like literally, that is the concept I always talk about. When I say the words fearless authenticity, though, what comes to mind for you in your own life?
Oh, goodness. It's something, honestly, that I think about all the time, because I think that there's all of these, when we think about society, and we think about the fact that you find yourself in these spaces where you might be the one or the first or the only one or one of a few, whatever that categorization as a person of color, as a woman, as whatever it might be, as a mom, whatever it might be. Fearless authenticity to me is really about being unafraid to be exactly who you are, and recognizing that whatever environment you're in, they need you to be exactly who you are. Because without that perspective, without that heart, without that energy that you're bringing, without that skill set, without those words, without your lived experience, whatever it can be. And a lot of us have lots of things, that we've been through in life. You and I, you talked about the caregiving. That's an experience that I had that wasn't always easy. It was the greatest joy of my life. It was also very stressful. And of course, there's grief attached to it because I then lost my mom. But what I knew when I became lieutenant governor is that experience was not something that was just something that happened and then it just disappeared. It was part of my narrative. It was woven into the fabric of who I am, so that when I come into the space of state administration or whatever space that I find myself in, I bring that to the forefront so that I can better serve people who also have experienced that as well.
Amen. Amen. It can't be easy, though, being the first Black anything, the first one, the only one, maybe the only one on a list of things that are in that office. Is that the biggest challenge that you faced? And if not, what has been the biggest challenge? And how do you handle that and bounce back from those challenges or maybe even failures?
Yeah, first of all, we know that there are so many people upon whose shoulders I stand, and all of us stand, women like, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Carol Moseley Braun. There's so many, Vice President Kamala Harris, there's so many women who also have broken barriers. And there's so many women that have broken barriers that I can't even name because they weren't the names that we have always heard. They're not the names that we've read about in history books, but nevertheless, they too walked into spaces where they were the first or the one of a few or the only. And so I know that I think about that and I stand on their shoulders, and I always think about how my shoulders can stay firm for the next person to come behind me, because the goal is never to be the first or the only. The goal is to break a barrier, open the door, and then cheer everyone on as they come behind you so that they can be in as well. I would not say that this has been the most difficult thing. First of all, I have an incredible, I'm incredibly blessed to be partnered with a wonderful leader in Governor Pritzker, who from the very beginning said, I want you to bring your full self and to be my partner in governance. And so that has been, so having wonderful allies who want to make sure that you succeed and that you can be who you really are. So that is not, from that standpoint, it doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, of course, but that has been a big help. But I will also say, and I just talked about, my dear mother, Velma, who I lost in 2016. And I remember that she passed right before I was starting a campaign for state representative. And that was a tough campaign as well. I think I've been in tough campaigns each time, except for LSC. And I just remember at that moment thinking to myself how hard it was to get up every day after caring for my mother for a number of years, losing her and the emotion behind that, and then moving to campaign mode. But one of the things that I thought at that time was, what could you throw at me that's more difficult than losing my mom? Like, what else could you do that you think is going to be as difficult as that? And I just kind of had to shift my perspective, because sometimes there are things, and I think about right now, Jeanne, for example, in this pandemic, there's been so much loss and so much grief, and people have really been going through grief on multiple levels, quite frankly. And so you gotta sometimes just put things into perspective, count your blessings. I write in my gratitude journal each night about the many things that I'm grateful for. It's hard to think about the opportunity that I have to serve as being difficult in any way, even as being the first. And the people of Illinois are just so great. I meet amazing people all across the state who welcome me wherever I go. And so, I would say that it has not been, there are challenges to be sure, but I try to look at the challenges as just, how do you put it in the right perspective? There are some things that have been very painful that we all experience. And we have to understand that there are some, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days, but mostly they're good.
Oh, I just love that. And I love hearing you talk about your mother, because that shared experience, that honor and of the responsibility and the duty to bringing our parents to the other side is something that nobody looks forward to, but you never realize the gift in it when it happens and what it shows you about yourself. Let's go back to your first elected office and how that connects to the work you're doing now for teachers, because clearly education is important, as it is for many high achieving people from Black families and especially minority, not that it's not important for everybody, but clearly that's a priority, your own path through education and then going in to advocate for your children. How does that translate now into what's happening? Because the pandemic and education, it is clear that our system has to do some sort of change because there's a teacher shortage, there's frustration on a lot of different levels, and you're trying to address that now. So let's talk about that for a second and tease that apart and why that's so important for you.
Well, the first thing that I want to say is thank God for teachers. You know, my mom was a teacher, my sister's a teacher.
Same.
We all are where we are because of teachers. And I just want to begin by expressing my deepest appreciation to those in a profession that don't often hear that we just are thankful and appreciative of the work that they do every day. And it's not just teachers. I mean, there's school personnel, not, principals, and those that are working in the cafeterias, and those who are keeping the buildings clean, and teachers' assistants and security, all sorts of folks that are in school buildings who love children and want to make sure that they have the best start in life and can go as far as they can and reach their dreams. And that is such a noble profession. And yet we do know that through this pandemic, especially, but really before the pandemic, we were already hearing from educators who talked about how the challenges that they face and how wondering whether or not they could continue in the profession. And so then when you add the pandemic on top of it, which has impacted all of us and has brought a level of trauma in so many levels, we saw that the conversation about the teacher shortage, a shortage that has been existing, especially in Black and Brown communities, that shortage has been existing. But I think this has bubbled up to the surface with this pandemic because so many people were sitting at home with a little one saying, whoa, what is happening? I'm supposed to do what? And you're logging in and you're trying to work and you're trying to do all this. So I think that there were just so many more people who understood what teachers really are up against and what they have to do. And it's like, oh, you're not going to stop talking right now, because I say, you have little ones that are just like, what is happening right here? And now you have a classroom of 30 of them or 25 or however many. So I started this work of going to, so there's lots of folks in Illinois who have been doing the work to address the teacher shortage. There's legislators. The Illinois Black Caucus passed it's 4 different pillars, but one of them focused on education and workforce development that did tremendous work after Governor Pritzker signed it into law to really focus on looking at education in our Black communities and Black educators and supporting Black education systems, as well as other communities that don't have access to opportunity. So right now I'm touring all of our public universities, colleges of education to look at the teacher preparation programs and to meet with the deans of these and students, most importantly, at these institutions who are preparing to go into the classroom so that I could hear the challenges. We know that right now that we're hearing teachers leaving the profession. We're hearing about teacher burnout, which, by the way, statistically, Black and Brown teachers are much more likely to say, according to recent surveys, that they are especially burned out and ready to leave the profession. Well, we can't live in a society where we do not have teachers in the classroom with students being able to be loved on and cared for and taught by teachers. So we have to figure out how to stem the tide, make sure that there are people who recognize this is a noble profession to go into, but also reduce the barriers that are keeping them from going into this profession. And as I've been listening to students in these programs, there's quite a few barriers that we can work on.
One of the things I notice about your work is that you spend a lot of time touring this state. And because I saw you do it with the caregiving, the support for caregivers and recognition and the training for nurses and other healthcare workers for people recognizing the signs of dementia. I've read about you doing it with your initiatives for our rural populations. Why is listening so important to you? And how does that play into the gift of who you are?
I think it was about 20 years ago that I was trained as a restorative justice practitioner or a circle keeper. And for those who don't know what restorative justice is, it's really a framework for I believe, solving challenges, but also building community and recognizing that when you build community, when you build relationships within a community, that you can really solve any problem that exists. Um, what we say in the restorative justice world, which has roots, by the way, in indigenous populations, what we say in the restorative justice world is that the wisdom is in the room. And what that means is that people who live in their communities, who know their communities, I'm from Bronzeville. I love Bronzeville. I know Bronzeville. And I want the best for Bronzeville. And now that I represent the entire state, I really say that Illinois is my community. I want the best for this state. I love the state and I love the people of this state. To get to those solutions, though, you have to go to the people. And I think for too often, people have this mindset that elected office is you're sitting in some office and, and so people don't see themselves as always having access. And it was very important for me as a restorative justice practitioner to recognize that it's not about people coming to me in an office, it's about me going to them in their setting, in their community, to learn about, to eat the food at their favorite restaurant, to kind of get a sense of, tell me the story about some of the history here, to look at their artwork, and to sit and listen to them, tell me what their issues are, what their concerns are, and how we as government can be in partnership with them. And so I really bring that restorative lens to the work that I do. I always say that it's not something that I do, it's who I am. I try to be restorative. And a key principle, by the way, Jeanne, of restorative justice is that we are working to repair harm that has been done. And when I think about our Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, our Asian communities, when I think about our rural communities, there's been policies, low income, under-resourced communities that have suffered decades of disinvestment through policies that did not pay attention to these communities. And so the way that I look at it, and I'm grateful that Governor Pritzker sees it the same way, is we have to repair the harm. We have to, first of all, agree not to do further harm. But secondly, how can policies now be used to repair harm? So when I talk about agricultural equity, if we look at the policies over history that have kept disconnected Black, Brown, and other folks of color from the land, what can we do now to focus on reconnection to the land and repairing the harm that has been done? When I think about the R3 program, which I chair, which invests 25% of the adult use cannabis funds back into communities most harmed by the war on drugs, it's because this system has decimated so many communities over the decades, generationally, quite frankly. We need to invest in these communities, and they should be the ones that we really focus on. So that's how I try to bring that restorative lens to the work that I do as Lieutenant Governor.
I know our time is coming to an end, and I swear I could talk to you forever. I got two last questions. This one is I hope fairly simple. What is your proudest achievement of all these wonderful things you've been able to do? What is your proudest achievement? And what do you still dream of doing?
Still doing in office, things that we want to do. So
in whatever way you think of it.
Yeah. Well, proudest achievement I'm going to focus on as Lieutenant Governor, because needless to say, my husband and my children, our family is something that I'm so proud of. And so I'm going to take it out of that realm and just say that, I've been so proud as an administration that we've been able to do things like raise the minimum wage, make sure that Illinois is a welcoming state for immigrant families, make sure that we codified women's rights and reproductive rights, making sure that we, made sure that we lift up and support our LGBTQIA families, and making sure that we're investing through infrastructure and access to broadband. There's so many things that we have done as administration that I am extremely proud of, including passing a balanced budget every single year and making sure that we had the first credit rating upgrades in 2 decades. Like, there's so much good stuff happening. personally, I will say that the work that we've done on Alzheimer's has been something I'm tremendously proud of, because not only did we go around the state and listen, not only did we advocate and push for some real change, but we're the first state in the nation, because of this work that we did in the Through Our Eyes campaign. We're the first state in the nation that now requires all healthcare, adults serving healthcare professionals to get training on how to identify the signs of dementia and Alzheimer's. No other state has done that. And that came from listening to the wisdom that is found in communities. And I say that because it's all, for me, in honor of my mother, Velma Catherine Wiggins, who showed me so much about what it means to love others and care for others. And I was honored to be able to do that for her as her caregiver. So much love to all the caregivers out there, but also Illinois is leading the way to make sure that we do this better. And in terms of what I look forward to in the future, I mean, again, I think that, we are so focused on continuing to put Springfield back on the side of working families. And there's so much more that we need to do. But working on this education space and really opening up the pipeline for more Black and Brown teachers to end up in the classroom. We know that research shows that if a student has even just one Black teacher, they're not just Black students, any student who has at least one Black teacher is going to do better. And Black students are going to be more likely to go to college, to graduate high school and go on to college if they have a Black teacher. We have to get more young people of color to understand we need them in our classrooms. And that's what I look forward to doing through our initiative to address the teacher shortage.
I love it, because my mother was a teacher as well, a music teacher at that. So there was a whole lot of influence, and my mama did. And I was the first one. Well, maybe not the very first one, because she was teaching before me, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Final question. When do you feel that you are at your best, truest, most authentic expression of you?
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, let me just say, I've been working with a personal coach around just like some things that I want to do around, I think it's good for everyone to check in with an objective third party to just kind of talk through what are you thinking about and that sort of thing. So it's been very helpful to me. One of the questions she asked me recently was just like, when are you at your peak performance? And so when you asked about your best, I would say it's things like if I'm drinking my water, if I'm getting a good night's sleep, if I'm exercising, if I'm eating pretty healthy, if I'm meditating and praying daily, and if I'm journaling. And those are the kinds of things that help me to be my best. But in terms of the question, I just want to shift it a little bit, because what I do believe is that I try to bring my authentic self at all times. There's no sort of like best authentic self. It is where I am at that moment. And sometimes I'm feeling completely energized and I'm okay with being there. Other times I'm, because of so many things that, like all of us, we get exhausted about all the things that we're juggling. And so maybe my energy will shift. What I try to do is show the full complexity of who I am and not mask that in any way. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that I, go into an event and I'm not, revved up and ready to go. But what it means is that I try to stay in tune with where I am. And meditation helps a lot with that, to pause just for a moment, to breathe, and to just check in with yourself. And I think when we do that, we can make those minor adjustments so that we can tackle whatever we have before us. But it starts with not just going through life, think just wherever the wind takes you, but being rooted and grounded in who you are. And there's 3 questions that I'll close with that I try to ask myself that comes from a meditation, a meditation that I took, that I've done, that says, who are you? Where have you been? And what do you know? Who are you? Where have you been? And what do you know? Ask yourself those 3 questions periodically, and you will realize that you are great. You know some things. You've been some places, and you can tackle anything that comes before you.
I am inspired and energized. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your honesty, and for what you're doing with your work. That's it, sis. I'm good for a while with that. Thank you. I feel honored.
Well,
I
Jeanne,
appreciate you.
if you, whenever you say, hey, let's chat it up, I am ready, because I love talking with you and I appreciate the positivity that you're bringing and helping us to be our fearless, most authentic selves.
Thank you, sis. I can't wait to see when you run in the world. That's all I'm gonna say. That's how I'm ending it. Because that's you get my vote to run the world at this point. I can't wait till our next conversation. That was something. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton gave us a masterclass in fearless authenticity, and by example and by process. And some of my favorite things that she said get to the heart of what I want people to think about with fearless authenticity. It's challenging me to go deeper and to get better at this, at life, at all of it. So the first thing would be fearless authenticity is about being unafraid to be exactly who you are, and that the gifts that were created in me, there should be the question of how can I give back with those? It's almost like that saying, no, it's exactly like that saying, love isn't love until you give it away, right? We can have love and we can keep it within us, but it's the expression of love that makes it so special. And I think that's the same thing for fearless authenticity. And maybe it's an analogy for love, that when we give of ourselves, that is love. The other piece about the gifts that was important to me was focusing on our gifts and letting that be the focus, because then the room will be made for you. I think so often we seek to fit some other mold or follow the advice that other people have given us. Not that that's bad, but we do it to emulate or replicate or fit into something else and to be a good fit, as opposed to trusting that the process of becoming our best selves and being that person, that when that happens, it all sort of falls into place. You hear a lot of successful people talk about that, when they let go of everything else and they just focus on what it is they are meant to bring, that the room is made for them because they're bringing that unique thing that is needed in that moment or with that particular person or audience. And then finally, and these are 3 questions I'm going to incorporate into my life regularly, periodically, as a check-in. Who are you? Where have you been? And what do you know? I think that can guide so many things, because who we are changes over time. Where we've been brings us to different spaces, both in our heads and physically. And then what do we know from all of that? What have we learned? What can we apply? And doing that intentionally, because I think it happens just by being on this earth. But when you do it intentionally, that infuses so much power in it. So, man, thank you, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, for that class, for sharing, and for being such a delightful guest today. Thank you also to my Fearless Authenticity team for making this pod happen. And thank you to you, our listeners, for your support. Please follow me at JM Sparrow on social. Like, rate, review, follow the pod on the iHeart app, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Share with your community. We are also on YouTube if you want to see the videos and see our happy heads talking. And also send us your comments and your questions. We want to know about the guests you would like to chat with and hear from. And we also want to know how you're being your best, truest, most authentic self, and maybe how this pod has helped you do that. This has been Fearless Authenticity with Jeanne Sparrow. We'll see you again soon.